including geopolitical tensions between the United States and China, and the tariff war under the Trump administration that started to make people start to question whether the integrated relationship that the United States had with China was really the way forward. And we've seen a series of measures and actions under the Biden administration, which in many respects has led to decoupling, but I would call it selective decoupling in specific sectors. Overall, trade between the United States and China is at all-time highs. There have been other challenges, including Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What's that done to energy? And I'm sure Mignon will be talking more about that. But the energy crisis, the food crisis, then we have these major supply chain disruptions where many economies feel that they need to kind of look after their own interest and balance what I would call onshoring or reshoring with friendshoring or secure supply chains, and I'm sure we'll get to that more. You know, one thing about globalization, and I think this is really underscores the change in US trade policy under the Biden administration, and that is that while globalization had many positive effects and lifted many out of poverty, hundreds of millions out of poverty, also led to economic growth, growth in trade, growth in investment, it really contributed, and there's a debate as to what extent, but it contributed to income inequality. And that has led to kind of a sense in the United States that maybe trade and globalization, all the trade agreements that I spent so much of my career negotiating, are no longer in our interest, that they really haven't served the United States well. And this has led to what's called this worker-centered trade policy, which is less about negotiating trade agreements and more about seeking the input of our middle class, of our workers, others in our country about what is the future, what should be the future, the proper future of our economy, and how could we ensure that economic benefits that are to be derived don't contribute to income inequality. And you look at the current international institutions we have, you look at the trading arrangements we have, they really haven't kept up with a lot of these challenges. The World Trade Organization in particular, I would argue, is kind of lost its way during COVID. A lot was going on. Countries were putting in a lot of export restrictions. They were limiting travel and trade between countries. And the WTO just didn't step up and find a way to address these concerns. And frankly, waited until just a few months ago at its ministerial meeting to come up with its COVID response, which was frankly too little, too late. And when you look at some of these new issues like supply chains, like climate, like digital, the WTO just seems to be, progressing at a very slow pace. Also, our free trade agreements haven't kept up with these changes. Some countries are updating their FTAs. I'd note in particular with respect to environment that New Zealand has done some really innovative things with the European Union and with the UK towards really kind of lifting the standards of their environmental commitments in their free trade agreements. And now we have, and I'll close on this, we've a new initiative that the United States has put forward in the Indo-Pacific called IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. This is not a traditional trade agreement. Trade is just one component of the IPEF. But I think that's what's so innovative about the IPEF, and I know there's some skepticism and questions about it, but when you look at the issues that it's put on the plate, I think it's much more in line with the challenges that the global economy is facing, and as well as the regional economy. So again, trade, and when we talk about trade in IPEF, we're talking about digital, environment, labor, and a few other areas. But it's put resilient supply chains front and center in this initiative. And in the negotiating objectives that were just released over a week ago, there's discussions about creating an early warning mechanism about supply chain disruptions, about creating a crisis management mechanism so countries cooperate during times of crisis in supply chains, and other kind of innovative ideas. It also has a third pillar dealing with clean energy and decarbonization. Again, critical given the challenges that we're facing every day now with climate and how quickly the climate crisis is accelerating and really affecting all of us. And then finally, in line with our values, it deals with anti-corruption, which I would argue this pillar isn't as important as the other three, but still, if economies are going to really modernize and operate efficiently, they need to deal with anti-corruption. But to say that I think we're all kind of grappling with how we address these challenges and whether the current groupings and institutions we have are sufficient, or whether, I would argue, we need to be creative here. We need to come up, see how we can use existing institutions, existing organizations, but also create ad hoc mechanisms and mechanisms with different subsets of countries to address these challenges as they emerge. To be quite frank, I think the economic rivalry between the United States and China is here to stay. That doesn't mean that we need to confront each other, all aspects of our economic relationship, but for Washington in particular, I think the view is that the days of sitting down and negotiating economic or trade agreements with China are kind of past us. And now we really need to focus on becoming stronger at home, but also working with our allies and partners to coordinate our policies, and not just to be anti-China, but to really promote our vision and our values. And I think having an affirmative agenda is really critical, particularly if we're looking to bring on our Asian friends, to have them kind of sign up or at least support or work with us on our agenda. When we look at globalization and we look at supply chains, for a long time, the cost and efficiency kind of that was kind of the driving principle for many companies and consumers around the world. We really enjoyed the lower prices. But I think what a number of these supply chain disruptions and shocks have shown us is that, there's going to be a lot of disruptions, and our supply chains are fragile. And so just, going after lower costs is it's not sufficient. And companies need to also take into consideration vulnerabilities and create redundancies in their supply chains, even if that means higher costs. And for governments, I think, when they, speaking for Washington, I think when we look at our supply chains and globalization, I think the conclusion is, okay, so lower prices, but at what cost are we getting these lower prices? And if we're losing a lot of our manufacturing base, if we're promoting income inequality and we're really not equipped for the innovative and technological challenges and opportunities in the future, then low cost alone are not enough. But a challenge for all policymakers and politicians right now. Inflation is out there and it is a concern. But I think there is also a view that, if we're going to do what's right for our countries and promote our values and vision, then that will mean that we also need to, deal with some of these cost pressures as well.